maintenance shaft groaned under my weight as I descended, the metal ladder slick with condensation and rust. Each step echoed into the darkness below, the faint moans of the undead above becoming muffled as I left the world behind. The air grew colder and heavier, carrying the smell of mildew and something metallic. Blood, maybe. My flashlight flickered, and I cursed under my breath, smacking it against my thigh until it steadied. The sub-basement yawned below like a mouth waiting to swallow me. When my boots hit the ground, the darkness closed in, the faint beam of my flashlight slicing through thick shadows. Pipes stretched along the walls like veins, dripping water into puddles that gleamed under the light. The groans above faded, replaced by a more oppressive silence. My breath came in shallow gasps, every noise amplified. The creak of my boots, the faint rattle of the axe in my grip, the occasional drip of water echoing like gunfire. And then I heard it, a faint rustling from deeper in the shadows. I froze, my muscles tensing as I strained to pinpoint the sound. The rustling grew louder, accompanied by a wet, squelching noise that turned my stomach. I swung the flashlight toward the noise, the beam revealing a partially collapsed wall. Beyond it, movement. I edged closer, axe raised, every nerve screaming to turn back. The rustling stopped, and for a moment, the silence pressed against my ears like a scream waiting to explode. Then the rubble shifted. A hand emerged, bloated, pale, and twitching. It clawed at the concrete, dragging the rest of its body forward. The zombie's lower half was crushed, its intestines spilling out like wet rope, trailing behind it as it crawled. Its eyes were milk white, but they locked onto me with an unnatural hunger. Before I could react, another one appeared, and then another. They poured through the gap in the wall, their bloated forms slipping over one another, leaving trails of black ichor on the floor. They came at me like a tide, groaning and snarling. I swung the axe, the blade biting into the first one's skull with a wet crunch. Blood sprayed across my face as its body crumpled, but the others kept coming. The next one grabbed my ankle, its fingers digging into my boot. I brought the axe down, severing its arm at the elbow. The stump spurted thick black fluid, and the creature snarled, its teeth snapping inches from my leg. I kicked it away, the force sending it sprawling into the others. I swung again, the axe sinking into a bloated chest. The body exploded with a grotesque pop, spraying chunks of flesh and rancid gore. The stench hit me like a punch, making my stomach lurch, but I couldn't stop. They were relentless, their broken bodies twisting and writhing as they crawled closer. One lunged at me, its mouth wide and jagged teeth bared. I caught it midair, slamming it against the wall. Its head burst like an overripe melon, brain matter splattering across the pipes. When the last one fell, I stood there, panting, surrounded by a sea of mutilated corpses. The floor was slick with blood and ichor, the air heavy with the stench of death. My arms trembled, the axe slipping from my grip to clatter against the concrete. The rustling had stopped. For now, the sub-basement was silent again. I wiped my face with my sleeve, smearing gore across my skin. The flashlight's beam flickered as I turned, scanning the room. That's when I saw it. A steel door, partially obscured by rubble. The words, "emergency storage," were stenciled across its surface. The paint faded but still legible. I stepped closer, my boots squelching through the carnage. A plaque beside the door read, "For use in catastrophic events. Priority, municipal leaders, and first responders." Hope flared in my chest. Supplies, weapons maybe, something to keep me alive. I grabbed the crowbar from my pack and jammed it into the door's seam, my muscles screaming as I pried it open. The metal groaned, then gave way, revealing darkness beyond. The smell hit me first, stale air and mildew, with a faint metallic tang. My flashlight revealed crates stacked haphazardly, their labels faded but promising. Canned food, medical supplies, ammunition. But before I could step inside, a noise froze me in place. A faint banging from the maintenance shaft above. The undead were following. I grabbed what I could carry, water bottles, a first aid kit, a box of rifle rounds, and slammed the door shut behind me. The banging grew louder, accompanied by guttural groans. They were coming. I turned and ran, my boots splashing through blood and puddles as I retraced my steps. The sub-basement felt tighter, darker, as if the walls were closing in. When I reached the ladder, I looked up, the faint light from the office above barely visible. The groans echoed down, growing louder with each second. I gripped the ladder and started climbing. I wasn't going to die here, not yet. The moans echoed behind me, growing louder as I climbed the maintenance ladder. My hands burned, slick with sweat and grime, but I didn't stop. Every pull on the rungs sent pain shooting through my shoulders, but the alternative, a wave of gnashing teeth and rotten claws, kept me moving. As I hauled myself back into the office building, the air felt heavier, choked with the smell of blood and death. The faint light of dawn filtered through cracked windows, casting long shadows across the chaos. Broken desks and shattered monitors littered the floor, and streaks of blood painted the walls like grotesque murals. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath. But the groans from below reminded me that this wasn't over. I needed to find a way out, or up. I crept through the building, every step careful, my fire axe held tightly. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint shuffling of the dead in the distance. My flashlight flickered, its dying beam illuminating glimpses of carnage. A severed hand clutching a stapler, a blood-soaked tie tangled in a broken chair. I moved toward the stairwell, the door ajar. A soft moan drifted through, low and guttural, sending a chill down my spine. I pushed the door open slowly, peering inside. The stairwell was dark, the walls streaked with handprints that dragged downward. At the base of the stairs, a zombie in a shredded suit shuffled aimlessly, its head lolling to one side. Its jaw hung open, black ichor dripping onto the steps. I descended carefully, the axe raised. The creature didn't notice me until I was close enough to smell its rot. With a quick swing, I buried the blade in its skull. The impact was sickening, a wet crack that sent blood spraying across the concrete. I pulled the axe free, the body collapsing with a thud. The noise echoed, and from above, another groan answered. I climbed the stairs, my legs trembling. The second floor was more intact, the hallways littered with overturned desks and fallen ceiling tiles. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made my skin crawl. I moved cautiously, scanning each corner before stepping forward. A faint sound caught my attention, a wet, dragging noise. As I rounded a corner, I saw it, a zombie, its torso mangled and its legs useless, pulling itself across the floor with bloodied hands. Its head turned toward me, milky eyes locking onto mine. I didn't hesitate. The axe came down hard, splitting its skull with a spray of gore. The body twitched once, then stilled. I wiped the blade on my sleeve, my breath shaky. "Keep moving," I muttered to myself. The next few rooms were empty, the silence only broken by the faint groans below. I found a break room, its door partially ajar. Inside, the air was stale but not unbearable. The fridge had been looted, but I found a half-full water bottle under a table, the label smeared with blood. I pocketed it and moved on. At the end of the hallway, I found a reinforced door with a keypad. The plaque next to it read, Executive Suite. The door was locked, but the keypad had been smashed, the wires dangling loose. I wedged the axe into the seam and pushed with all my strength. The metal groaned, then gave way, the door swinging open with a loud clang. Inside, the suite was surprisingly intact. Thick curtains blocked most of the light, but the room felt secure. The windows were reinforced, and the furniture was heavy enough to use as barricades. A small kitchenette sat in the corner, untouched, and a balcony overlooked the city. I stepped out onto the balcony, the morning light blinding after hours in the dark. Below, the city stretched out in a scene of chaos. Streets choked with abandoned cars, fires smoldering in the distance, and hordes of the dead shuffling aimlessly. It wasn't safe, but it was higher ground. I set my supplies on a desk and began exploring the suite, checking every corner for anything useful or dangerous. The kitchenette yielded little: a can opener, some utensils, and a pack of stale crackers. As I worked, a noise from the balcony caught my attention. I stepped outside, squinting against the sunlight. Far below, movement caught my eye. A small group of survivors sprinted down the street, their faces pale with terror. Behind them, a horde of zombies surged forward, their numbers overwhelming. The survivors screamed, their voices barely audible over the guttural groans of the dead. I gripped the balcony railing, helpless as the horde overtook them. The screams stopped quickly, replaced by the sickening sounds of flesh tearing and bones snapping. I turned away, bile rising in my throat. The suite was quiet, but the horrors outside stayed with me. I began dragging furniture to the door, barricading it as best I could. My mind raced. This place could work, temporarily. I could fortify it, use it as a vantage point to plan my next move. But the groans from the street below reminded me that I was running out of time. The dead wouldn't stay down there forever. I sat on the balcony, staring at the horizon. The city was falling, and I was alone. The sun dipped behind the crumbling skyline, casting the city into an oppressive gloom. I sat on the edge of the balcony, staring down at the street below. The horde was still there, their moans drifting upward like a grotesque hymn. I gripped my fire axe tightly, the handle still sticky with dried blood. This place wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was defensible. For now, it would have to do. I dragged the heavy conference table toward the front door, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. The suite was quiet for now, but the silence felt precarious, like it could shatter at any moment. With the table in place, I grabbed a filing cabinet and pushed it against the door. It's not much, I thought, wiping sweat from my brow. But it'll slow them down. The reinforced windows and balcony were my biggest assets. From up here, I had a clear view of the streets below and the surrounding buildings. If they came, I'd see them first. The supplies I found in the sub-basement were still scattered across the room. I began organizing them, setting the canned food and bottled water in the kitchenette and spreading the ammunition on the desk. My rifle sat beside it, cleaned and loaded. The generator hummed faintly on the balcony, powering a single overhead light that cast long shadows across the suite. There was still more to retrieve. I'd left half the supplies in the sub-basement, unable to carry everything in one trip. I dreaded going back down there, but I didn't have a choice. The stairwell was dark and stifling, the smell of death still lingering. I descended cautiously, flashlight in one hand, axe in the other. Every creak of the stairs sent a jolt through me. I reached the sub-basement without incident, but the bodies were still there, bloated, mangled, and leaking. I ignored them, focusing on the crates of supplies. I filled my pack with medical kits, spare batteries, and a few tools before heading back up. By nightfall, I'd fortified the suite. The barricade at the door was reinforced with furniture and wiring scavenged from the office. I set up tripwire alarms, using empty soda cans and string, hoping the faint rattle would give me enough warning. The balcony became my watchtower. I arranged the furniture to create a makeshift barricade, positioning my rifle for quick access. The generator provided just enough power to keep the lights on, though I kept them dim to avoid attracting attention. The suite started to feel less like a death trap and more like a haven. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. Time became a blur. Days turned into weeks as I settled into a routine, scavenging supplies, reinforcing defenses, and keeping a journal of zombie movements. The rifle became an extension of me. Every bullet counted, and every shot deliberate. The city below remained a nightmare. The undead roamed aimlessly, their groans a constant reminder of what waited beyond the walls. Occasionally, I spotted survivors, stragglers darting between buildings, only to be overwhelmed moments later. Each encounter left me colder, more detached. The world had become a graveyard, and I was just another ghost wandering its ruins. It was late evening when I heard it, the faint sound of voices. At first I thought I was imagining it, a trick of the wind or my own mind playing cruel games. But as I stepped onto the balcony, I saw them. A group of survivors, maybe half a dozen, moved cautiously through the street below. They were armed, their movements deliberate and tactical. At their center was a man who walked with a quiet confidence, his sharp eyes scanning the buildings around him. "Shit," I muttered, gripping my rifle. I watched them from the shadows, unsure whether to call out or stay hidden. The horde wasn't far. The groans grew louder as the group passed, and I saw the first shambling forms emerge from an alley. The man leading them noticed too. He raised a hand, signaling his group to halt, then turned to face the oncoming zombies. They moved like a unit, their weapons precise and efficient. Headshots dropped the undead one by one, but the noise attracted more. The horde swelled, pouring out of alleys and storefronts, their moans reaching a fever pitch. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my rifle and steadied it against the balcony railing. I aimed at the edge of the horde, squeezing the trigger. The shot rang out, taking down a zombie just as it lunged for one of the survivors. The man glanced up, his eyes locking onto me. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement, before turning back to his group. I fired again and again, thinning the horde as much as I could. The survivors moved quickly, retreating toward the base of my building. I met them at the barricade, my fire axe in hand. The man at the front raised his hands in a gesture of peace, his calm demeanor disarming. "Thanks for the assist," he said, his voice steady. "Name's Ethan Marks. We've been watching you for a while." "Watching me?" I asked, my grip tightening on the axe. "We're building something," Ethan said. "A safe zone, a real one, but we need people like you, people who know how to survive." I stared at him, my mind racing. Trust was a luxury I couldn't afford, but the isolation was wearing on me. "You don't have to decide now," Ethan added, "but think about it. You've done well here, but sooner or later, you're going to need help." I watched as they moved into the suite, setting up a temporary camp. Ethan leaned against the wall, his eyes scanning the room with quiet approval. For the first time in months, I felt something other than fear or anger. Hope.